In the misty hills of 16th-century Hungary, where ancient castles pierced the sky like jagged teeth, a girl was born into one of the most powerful noble families in Europe. Her name? Elizabeth Báthory. She would grow to be known as the Blood Countess, a name whispered in horror across the continent. But before the legend of blood and cruelty, there was a child. A child shaped by war, power, and secrets. Elizabeth was born in 1560 into the mighty Báthory family, a dynasty that produced princes, warriors, and even kings. Her bloodline was tangled with royalty. Her uncle was the King of Poland, her cousin a Grand Duke of Lithuania, and her family wielded enormous influence within the turbulent Kingdom of Hungary. This was no ordinary noblewoman. This was a girl bred for power. But her world was not one of peace and luxury. Hungary in the 16th century was a land at war, torn apart by the Ottoman Empire pressing from the south and the Habsburgs from the west. Castles were not just homes, they were fortresses. Children were raised with iron in their hearts. Elizabeth, even as a child, was surrounded by violence, executions, and tales of dark justice. Rumors say that as a girl she witnessed acts of cruelty that would stain her soul. Public punishments, executions of rebels, even the sight of impaled prisoners along the roads. This was not unusual for a noble of her time. Cruelty was a language of power. But to later storytellers, it would become a convenient seed for the monstrous legend she would bear. Elizabeth was also brilliant. She spoke several languages, Latin, German, Hungarian, and was educated in politics, law, and economics. In an age when noble girls were taught only to embroider, she studied the art of ruling. Her letters, still preserved, show a sharp, commanding mind. This was no helpless damsel, this was a strategist. At the age of 15 she was married off to Ferenc Nadasdy, a powerful Hungarian nobleman and warrior, nicknamed the Black Knight of Hungary, for his brutal campaigns against the Ottomans. Their marriage was not just a union of two people but of two great houses, a fusion of power that would create one of the richest, most formidable courts in the region. Elizabeth moved into the Nadasdy family castle at Sarver. It was a cold, imposing fortress surrounded by villages whose peasants toiled under the heavy yoke of war and taxes. While Ferenc fought on the front lines, Elizabeth managed their vast estates, hundreds of servants, soldiers, and villagers under her command. She was, in effect, a ruler. It was here, in the shadow of this castle, that whispers began. Servants spoke of her strict discipline, her relentless control, her icy demeanor. Peasants feared her authority. Later, these whispers would bloom into accusations of unspeakable cruelty. But at the time they were just that, whispers. Elizabeth's husband, Ferenc, was himself a man of terrible reputation. On campaign against the Ottomans, he was rumored to have tortured prisoners, honing sadistic methods of punishment. Some claim that he shared these techniques with Elizabeth, teaching her ways to break the human spirit. Others claim this was pure invention, crafted by her enemies decades later. The truth is murky, but the legend was being written even before the crime she would later be accused of. In these early years, Elizabeth was also a mother. She bore several children, whom she raised with the same strictness she applied to her household. She was not the wild, blood-soaked monster that later storytellers would imagine. She was, at least outwardly, a powerful noblewoman holding her family's estates together while her husband fought a brutal war. But in the corridors of Sarver, a darker reality stirred. Servants disappeared. Peasants whispered of unexplained punishments. And in the popular imagination this became something more. A woman of high birth, dabbling in forbidden practices. A noblewoman who, some said, sought eternal youth through the blood of virgins. No evidence exists of bloodbaths in this period. Yet the seeds of that myth, noble cruelty, peasant fear, a powerful woman in a patriarchal society, were all here waiting to sprout. By the time Ferenc Nadasdy died in 1604, Elizabeth was one of the richest and most powerful widows in Europe. She controlled vast estates, commanded troops, and wielded influence that rivaled kings. But she was also vulnerable. A powerful widow with no husband's protection was a dangerous figure, especially to ambitious men at court. It is here, in the twilight of her husband's death, that the legend of the Blood Countess would truly begin. Enemies circled, accusations mounted, and the dark stories of her cruelty would erupt into scandal. But for now, in the halls of her castle, Elizabeth Báthory was still untouchable, still powerful, and still in control. In the next chapter we'll step inside the dark heart of the legend, the alleged tortures, the secret rooms, and the political conspiracy that would destroy her. Winter of 1604. The castle of Secht rises like a jagged claw from the frozen hills of northern Hungary. Inside its walls, a widow in her mid-40s walks the corridors at night, candle in hand. Her name, Elizabeth Báthory. Her husband, the Black Knight of Hungary, is dead. His sword, which had once shielded her from enemies, now lies cold and unused. And with his death, the first cracks begin to show in her fortress of power. Rumors whisper louder now. Servants tell tales of punishments that go beyond the normal harshness of noble life. Peasants mutter about girls taken into the castle and never seen again. Local priests note strange absences in the villages. What's happening inside Szeged Castle? No one knows for sure. But in a time when superstition and fear run wild, mystery breeds monsters. According to later testimony, Elizabeth begins to recruit young peasant girls as maids for her court. Many never return home. The stories that spread are gruesome: beatings, burnings, mutilations, even the draining of blood. Some claim she experiments with needles, knives, and branding irons. Others say she keeps a book where she records each victim's name, over 600 in all. Yet for all these tales, no contemporary record proves them. No bodies have been found. No bloodbaths documented. Only words. Only fear. But the story that will make her infamous is this. One day a young servant girl brushes Elizabeth's hair too roughly. Enraged, Elizabeth strikes her. A drop of blood lands on Elizabeth's hand. In that drop she sees, or thinks she sees, her skin grow younger. From then on, she believes that bathing in the blood of virgins will keep her forever youthful. This is the myth of the Blood Countess. And it is a myth. No credible evidence exists she ever believed this. But the story fits the time's obsession with witchcraft, vanity, and female power. Still, people vanish. Servants whisper of a special room deep within the castle where punishments are carried out. And Elizabeth does not act alone. She has accomplices, a handful of trusted servants, including an old nurse named Ilona Jo, a crippled man named Fixco, and 2 other women. Whether they are co-conspirators or simply scapegoats is unclear. But their names will appear later in the court records. By 1610, the rumors have grown so loud that the Hungarian crown can no longer ignore them. Palatine Georgi Thurzo, the king's representative in Hungary, receives letters accusing Elizabeth of monstrous crimes. But behind these letters lurks politics. Elizabeth is a rich widow controlling vast lands. The Habsburg monarchy is perpetually in debt. Seizing her estates would fill their coffers. And so the investigation begins. Thurzo does not announce it publicly. He moves in secret, sending agents to gather testimonies from villagers, priests, and surviving servants. The depositions pile up. Tales of torture, of girls locked in dungeons, of corpses burned or buried in unmarked graves. Yet many of these witnesses did not see the acts themselves, they heard them from others. Gossip becomes evidence. In December 1610, Thurzo makes his move. Under the cover of darkness, he rides to Szeged Castle with soldiers. What happens next will seal Elizabeth Báthory's fate. According to Thurzo's report, he bursts into the castle and catches Elizabeth red-handed, literally, with the body of a dead girl and another wounded one lying nearby. Servants are arrested on the spot. Elizabeth herself is placed under house arrest. But even this dramatic raid raises questions. No official inventory of bodies is taken. The supposed caught in the act moment is described only in Thurzo's letter to the king. The surviving documents are riddled with inconsistencies. Was Elizabeth truly a monster? Or had Thurzo staged the scene to justify seizing her wealth? Over the following weeks, the court at Pressburg takes testimony from hundreds of witnesses. The transcripts, still preserved, are a strange mix of horror and hearsay. Some say she killed 50 girls. Some say 650. Some say she drank their blood. Others say she merely beat them. The numbers swell like a dark legend. And in every story, Elizabeth is cast as the villain. Her servants, under torture, confess to everything. Ilona Jo Fixco, and the others admit to aiding her in torturing and killing dozens of girls. They describe rooms of blood, hidden dungeons, secret burial grounds. Whether these confessions are true or simply forced under pain of death is impossible to know. But the court takes them at face value. The servants are executed in horrific ways, burned alive, their bodies torn apart. Only Fixco, the crippled man, is shown mercy. He is beheaded before his body is burned. Elizabeth herself, however, is never put on trial. As a noblewoman of high rank, she is shielded from a public spectacle. Instead, she is sentenced by royal decree. She will not be executed. She will not face a jury. She will be walled up inside her own castle, sealed into a small set of rooms with only slits for food and air. There she will remain until she dies. In the summer of 1614, guards peering through the slit find Elizabeth lying face down on the floor. She is dead. The Blood Countess is gone. She is buried quietly, her body moved several times, her grave eventually lost. Some say her restless spirit still haunts the ruins of Szeged Castle. But the legend she left behind, that lives. In pamphlets, in plays, in dark whispers across Europe. A noblewoman who bathed in the blood of virgins. A female vampire. The world's first serial killer. Or, a victim of political intrigue, crushed by a crown eager to take her fortune. The truth is hidden somewhere between these shadows. In our next chapter we will pull back the curtain and examine the why, the politics of the Habsburg court, the debts owed by the crown, and the myths of female power and witchcraft that fueled Elizabeth Báthory's transformation from widow to monster. The year is 1614. Elizabeth Báthory is dead, sealed forever inside her castle. But her story does not end here. In many ways this is where it truly begins. With her gone, the whispers turn into pamphlets, the accusations into legend. The Blood Countess is born, not as a woman of flesh and blood but as a myth. Why did this happen? The answer lies not only in Elizabeth's actions but in the turbulent politics of her time. To understand her fate, we must step beyond the castle walls and into the courts of Europe. At the start of the 17th century, the Habsburg monarchy is drowning in debt. Endless wars against the Ottomans, the upkeep of armies, and the extravagance of royal courts have drained the treasury. Meanwhile, Hungary is a fractured kingdom, part under Ottoman rule, part under Habsburg control. The great noble families, like the Báthorys and the Nadasdys, wield immense power and wealth. In some regions they rival the king himself. Elizabeth Báthory, as the widow of Ferenc Nadasdy, controls vast estates, hundreds of villages, and a small army of retainers. She is a formidable figure, rich, connected, and independent. To some in Vienna she is not just a widow. She is a threat. When accusations of cruelty begin to circulate, Palatine Georgi Thurzo sees an opportunity. By investigating and condemning Elizabeth, he can not only remove a dangerous rival but also place her enormous wealth under royal control. Some historians believe Thurzo's raid on Szeged Castle was staged, that the bodies found were planted or exaggerated to justify her arrest. Others argue Elizabeth was guilty but scapegoated to protect the nobility as a whole. The truth is as murky as the Danube in winter. What we do know is this: after her arrest, the Habsburg crown quickly moved to confiscate her lands. Her children were forced to sign away parts of their inheritance. The wealth that had made Elizabeth powerful now flowed into royal coffers. The political threat she posed was eliminated. Her enemies had won. Yet even in death, Elizabeth's story continued to evolve. Within a few decades, pamphlets and plays began to circulate telling of her blood baths, her vampiric rituals, her secret tortures. These tales were not in the original court records. They were embellishments, sensational stories to thrill and horrify audiences. In a Europe obsessed with witchcraft trials, female vanity, and aristocratic decadence, Elizabeth became the perfect villain. Her legend also fed into a deeper cultural fear, the fear of powerful women. In an age when queens and noblewomen were supposed to be modest and obedient, Elizabeth was educated, commanding, and ruthless in managing her estates. To a patriarchal society, such a woman was unnatural. And unnatural women became witches, monsters, or worse. This is why the myth of the Blood Countess endures. It is a mirror reflecting Europe's anxieties about power, gender, and violence. Whether Elizabeth truly tortured hundreds of girls or whether she was a victim of a royal conspiracy, her story has been rewritten again and again. A noblewoman transformed into a vampire. The irony is that even the evidence against her was destroyed. The supposed Black Book, listing her victims, was never found. Her grave, originally placed at the local church in Szeged, was moved in secret. Some say villagers dug it up and hid it to stop her spirit from returning. Today no one knows where her body lies. Like the truth about her life, it has vanished. And yet, Elizabeth Báthory lives on, in literature, in horror films, in whispered tales of vampires. She is called the world's first female serial killer, the Countess Dracula, the Blood Countess. But she was also a real person, a widow navigating a violent, patriarchal world, ensnared in politics she could not control. In the end, perhaps Elizabeth's greatest crime was not murder but power. She had too much of it. She lived too boldly. And for that, she was walled up alive, erased, and turned into a monster of legend. Somewhere in the ruins of Szeged Castle, tourists still wander, hoping to feel her presence. They say on stormy nights you can hear a woman's voice behind the stones, whispering. Not words of horror, but words of protest. I am innocent. In our next chapter we will explore how Elizabeth Báthory's legend spread across Europe, how it shaped vampire folklore and why, 400 years later, her name still sends a chill down the spine. Centuries pass. The stones of Secht Castle crumble. The peasants who once whispered about the Countess are gone. But her story, her legend, grows. Like ivy creeping over ruins, it spreads from village gossip to court records, from court records to pamphlets, and from pamphlets to literature and film. The Blood Countess becomes something more than a woman. She becomes an archetype. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Europe is swept by a new obsession: vampires. From the forests of Transylvania to the salons of Paris, tales of undead nobles drinking the blood of the living captivate audiences. This is the era of Goethe, Polidori, and later Bram Stoker. And in the shadow of Dracula stands another figure, a woman, pale and noble, who bathes in blood to preserve her youth. Elizabeth Báthory. Her story fits perfectly into the vampire mythos. An aristocrat preying on peasants. A secret castle full of victims. An obsession with youth and immortality. It is almost as if her life was designed to become a horror story. But it was not. It was politics and rumor transformed by time. By the 19th century, writers begin using her name directly. She appears as a character in plays and novels, always more monstrous than human. In some, she is a literal vampire. In others, she is a sorceress. In every version, she is beautiful, deadly, and unnatural, a warning about the dangers of female power and vanity. This is the hidden secret of the Blood Countess's legend. It tells us more about the fears of society than about Elizabeth herself. The peasants feared the cruelty of their lords. The nobility feared powerful women. The church feared heresy and witchcraft. The modern world fears aging, corruption, and the hidden darkness behind wealth and beauty. In Elizabeth Báthory, all these fears converge. Even her supposed blood baths are symbolic. Blood is life. To bathe in it is to steal life from others, to reverse time, to defy death. For a society obsessed with mortality and purity, such an act was the ultimate sin. It is no wonder the myth endured. Today, historians continue to debate her guilt. Some argue she was a mass murderer. Others say she was framed. New studies of the trial records suggest the number of victims was far smaller than legend claims. Yet in the popular imagination she is fixed, the most prolific female serial killer in history, a vampire countess, a monster. And in this way Elizabeth Báthory becomes immortal. Not through blood but through story. In the 20th and 21st centuries she appears in films, TV shows, heavy metal lyrics, even video games. Her name is invoked alongside Dracula and Vlad the Impaler. She has transcended history. She is now myth. And yet, if you stand in the ruins of her castle in Slovakia today, it is quiet. The stones are cold. The rooms are empty. The slits in the wall where she was once fed are still there. Tourists leave flowers. Some whisper prayers. Others take selfies. But all of them feel something. A presence. Not of a monster, but of a woman erased by history and reborn as legend. This is the final hidden secret of the Blood Countess. She may have been guilty. She may have been innocent. But in the end it no longer matters. Her life has been rewritten by centuries of fear, fascination, and fantasy. She is immortal not because she bathed in blood, but because we cannot stop telling her story. And so ends the tale of Elizabeth Báthory, noblewoman, widow, monster, myth. The Blood Countess of Hungary. Her secrets lie buried with her, but her legend walks forever in the dark.